What did your butthole neighbor do? I moved onto a dirt road with several houses on it. My friend has lived down the road his whole life. The people next to my house only come up for the summer and are never there in the winter. When summer comes, however, there's multiple potholes on the road. Curious, I asked my friend. He said the neighbors come up in the summer and dig the holes themselves in order to slow down traffic. So that he had to access roads to his property. He didn't live there. He just had livestock there and insisted on using the one that cut through our property, despite the fact that it was the longer route and it was a literal unpaved road through the woods. He didn't have an easement or anything, just assumed that since he had to drive through our property to get to that crappy lane road, he was allowed to do so. He was a total dong to us for no reason, never said hi, got upset if we were too close to his property despite the fact that he literally drove through our property every day. Revenge came when lightning struck a tree in the woods and it fell right across the access to the lane road on our property. He hired a service to chop the tree up and told them they could have the wood as part of the payment. It was nice walnut. My dad wasn't having any of that. He walked down there with a copy of the sale documents, pointed out the marker that clearly separated our land from our butthole neighbor's land, got the neighbor to admit that the tree in question was both from our land and currently laying on our land, not his, and then my dad sent the crew packing and told them if they took so much as a branch from that tree, it was theft and he, a lawyer, would see them in court for it. It's been over 15 years and that tree is still laying across the access to the lane road. He can still access his property via the other road, so he didn't have a leg to stand on to force an easement. Frick you, Jim. This is hilarious lol. Frick you, Jim. I've posted on Reddit before about my upstairs neighbor who, long story short, got super heated about how I didn't see him in the hallway and say hi once, and then blamed his outburst on the fact that laundry makes him cranky. He drunkenly tried to get into my apartment last Wednesday afternoon, and then asked if I had a problem with him. When I explained that his behavior makes me uneasy, he called me passive aggressive, and then said everyone forgets where they live sometimes, and he'd forgotten where his apartment was because he was humming as he walked up the stairs. It must be so paralyzing to be that allergic to admitting fault. My neighbor would chant dong sucking B over and over and over every time I would do basic things like close the door or take a shower, hard enough for me to hear through the wall of my apartment. I was far from being loud. That guy just has so many issues. I got sick of it and called over the landlord. The landlord tried closing one door and the creep started chanting. My landlord went over right then and threatened to kick him out if he didn't stop. Luckily it worked. I don't live there anymore, but still remember it vividly. Context. I grew up in a rural area on a fairly big property. It had been a large farm that got parceled out as the owner aged. So there were 3/4 acre lots and my parents 10 acres behind them. The house was relatively far away from our neighbors. One neighbor was an absolute piece of crap. When I was 8, I remember seeing the cop lights at his door. Found out when I was a little older that he had tried to murder his father over his oxy prescription. Father owned the house. 30-year-old kid lived there rent-free. He did a few years in jail, then moved back in with his father who he had tried to kill. He grew pot on our land, then threatened to kill my mother when my father and I tore it down, but didn't call the cops. Frequently threatened to assault kill my mother. I can remember multiple times when I was younger, him banging on our door and screaming threats at my mom. Other times I can remember thinking about the gun in my father's office, in case our neighbor actually got inside the house. This was a 8-10 times a year occurrence from age 8-14. He has calmed down a little after a second arrest and some anger management classes. Nowadays he just had massive bonfires with tons of loud music and leaves empties on our property, which is still a butthole move, but better than physical intimidation and death threats. Threatening to kill someone's wife is a good way to get shot. He's a lucky dude. Jerry. When I moved in, he seemed eccentric, but harmless. Apparently my landlord had a conversation with him and told him to leave me alone. This upset Jerry greatly. He cornered me one day while I was unlocking my door and asked me to come sit with him in his apartment. I don't think the place had ever been cleaned and he had hoarder mentalities. He drank a bottle of wine in about 30 minutes, commenting on all the sad things in his life. Luckily he passed out, so I could leave. A couple weeks later, he got into a 3 a.m. fight with his boyfriend, which resulted in his boyfriend trying to get into my apartment for safety, and eventually breaking into an empty unit down the hall. Cops were called and Jerry was taken to jail. About a week after that, same boyfriend was over and a fight ensued. This time it ended in very loud sex. Jerry would flush things you're not supposed to flush down the toilet and would back up sewage into mine and my neighbor's bathtubs and bathroom sinks. Eventually he clogged his toilet so badly that he just ripped it from the wall and left it there. The cops came twice to my door to ask if I had seen Jerry lately, and asked to search my apartment to make sure I wasn't hiding him. One day while I was getting ready for work, he came into my apartment with another guy and tried to measure my walls for the renovation he was going to do to combine his and my apartments into one unit. But don't worry, I could just live with him when it was all finished. Eventually, Jerry got evicted, but would still convince people to let him into the building. For months his mugshot was pasted on all entrances saying to not let him in. LMAO at the renovation annexation. Both butthole and dumb, my neighbor above me was trying to force me to move out, so she put her speakers on her floor pointing straight down and blared them at full volume. The instant it started I leapt up in outrage at her audacity, but after a few seconds I realized I really like this song. So I give it one song, and as it's winding down I prepare my outrage once again, only to be choked off when the next song is also a perennial favorite. I didn't even bother getting upset before realizing that I liked the third song. 2. She stopped at midnight when she was legally required to, and apparently realized she wasn't getting much bang for her buck as far as irritating me effort on her part, so she didn't try it anymore. I really like this one with thought bubbles. How dare she? Ooh, dancing queen. Yeah, groovy. Ripped up and threw away my mum's sweet pea plant that she got from her friend who died of cancer. When she complained, he started ranting about how our garden is a disgrace and an embarrassment to the neighborhood and we need to replace all the grass and plants with concrete. Prick. His dog went through our trash and got sick. Dog ended up needing to go to the vet and told me when he bumped into me at my old job. Yeah, it was like $5 grand to get her back to health. You're lucky I don't bill you guys. Mind you, this guy let his dog go through everyone's yard and crap wherever it wanted. It's not like the dog escaped. He just willingly didn't care. Last time I saw him the cops were in his driveway with an apparent domestic incident. You're lucky I don't bill you guys. And you're lucky I didn't call animal control for letting your dog wander. Yelled at me for entering a shared garage to get some of our stuff. He later claimed I was after his gun, which was stored in a gun locker with a lock that only he had the key for. He was in his 60s or 70s at the time. He died last year, though. He used to stand on the footpath drunk every afternoon and yell to my husband about what a B I was. Once my husband told him to go home and he shaped up to try and punch my husband, who was around 50 years younger than the neighbor. My infraction? He rang one day to be nosy, check why my husband's car was home on a work day. I politely thanked him for his call and let him know my husband was sleeping and had a cold, nothing to worry about. Apparently I was meant to praise him profusely for being such a caring neighbor, and my husband was meant to follow up with a call once he was awake and also lavish him with praise for caring. Because we didn't. We got to hear about it loudly every afternoon until we moved several months later. Feels like a guys. Screamed obscenities through the wall at my children because they were talking too loudly in the middle of the day. Screamed at us through the walls in the middle of the night so we could see how it felt to be disturbed. Regularly dumped his old food out of his bathroom window into our shared backyard. Rodent infestation took place shortly thereafter. Stopped paying rent to our landlord because he felt that the landlord should have warned him that he might be able to hear his neighbors. Dumped his trash on our shared front porch. Landlord did not renew his lease. Took him to court. Got his unpaid rent money back plus additional payment for damages to the apartment. It was a glorious vindication. Partied too hard. As I got home from work one evening, I saw the neighbor chuck a beer bottle at one cop then throw a punch at another. Things did not go well for him after that. I found out after the fact that someone had called a noise complaint cause it was something like 11 PM on a weekday. This neighbor was a double butthole though. He had moved off campus with a pair of guys from his frat. The other two guys were cool. We had them over for grilling and vice versa. The guy who got arrested not only fricked himself, but caused so many issues that the other two guys who were on the lease got blacklisted by pretty much every place in town too. Late last year mine said he'll bash me because I got his driveway wet while I had the sprinkler going to water my yard. Not even joking. He flipped his crap over his driveway getting water on it. He's a drug addict, so yep. He must rage every time it rains. They use our trash bin and ram it full of bags of their gross nappies. I so badly want to take the bags out and leave them on their doorstep. Do it. They can't do anything about it. Your trash bin. They're garbage. We had a party for all the neighbors when we moved in. I like to barbecue, and my wife is vegetarian, so we have 2 barbecues. We invited everyone in the street. They declined because we're vegetarian. Not to worry, I said. So's my wife. We have 2 barbecues going, one for meat and one for veggies. I could see them trying to find another reason. They look at the invite. Oh, the 6th. We're out of town then. Sorry, that's cool. They don't want to come for whatever reason. They're not just going to say that. We're British. After all, the day of the party comes. Our garden is quite big, so everyone can fit in happily. We've got the barbecues going on the opposite side of the garden to the aforementioned neighbor's house. It's only about 4 hours into the party at around 5 PM that we notice the upstairs windows in their house are open. Weird, I thought they were out of town. As I'm looking at the windows with some of the other neighbors, we see the wife with a camera, taking photos of us. We go round and ring the bell to explain this is the party they were invited to and they're still welcome to join. No answer. Curtains twitching upstairs. We go back to the party and just ignore them. Later into the evening, the parents and kids have gone home. Just a mix of older and younger neighbors left. And I'm now mixing cocktails at the outside bar. Honestly, this house was amazing. I have no idea how it was in our budget, but anyway. And then the police walk in through the open back gate. Someone has lodged a complaint. It's only about 9 PM. Noise complaints in the UK are typically not followed up until it goes past 11 PM. But not only are we having the biggest party known to man, but we're setting things on fire and forcing alcohol onto children. Of course the police can see we're having a fairly civilized adult get together and congratulate us on moving to the area and for getting to know our neighbors in such a friendly way. Monday, we're off to unpack. Knock on the door. The police now have photographs of the alleged forcing alcohol on a minor and setting fire to things. It's one of the neighborhood kids bringing 2 beers from the fridge to me and his dad at the barbecue. They're not even open. The setting fire to things yet, using a blowtorch to light my barbecue. Apparently that's endangering their property, which is a good 100 yards away from the contained fire within my oil drum barbecue. The police can see this is bulls. They just need me to make a statement explaining. So I do. For the whole 2 years that we lived there, they avoided us. So weird, so unnecessary. I think your neighbors are the reason that place is so affordable. Got his cop buddies to come put stickers on our cars claiming they were illegally parked, so we had to move them so he would have room for his guests to park. I bought a corner lot in a newer subdivision, so I have curb and sidewalk on 2 sides of my property. The side of my house has plenty of room for parking, which I sometimes use. My stepson uses, and sometimes the other neighbors I like use. New neighbor bought a house on the other side of the street from my side and doesn't have a lot of street parking for his lot. He claims that the parking on my side of the road is his because it is across the street from his house. When confronted about the fact that it is just parking and no way belongs to him, me or anybody, he told us he knows people in the police department that can take care of this. He also picked this time to scream pretty specific mean things about all his new neighbors and how each one was crappy, like he is watching us. A call to his superiors should help. One of them was a cowboy builder who even conned his elderly next door neighbors into getting their roof done for £10,000 even though their tiles were almost brand new. He then took all their tiles to tile his roof for free and put about 10% of his old crappy tiles on their roof, then abandoned the project completely. Don't worry though, we got him arrested and he had to sell his house to pay back his victims, although the cost of his house didn't even come close to covering the full costs. Another neighbor would stand in his back garden really early in the morning, then start shooting local birds with a crossbow when they woke up, and he put the bodies in regular bin bags and left them in the street where foxes ripped them open and dragged dead birds all over the place. Now we have no songbirds in the area. Rang my doorbell at 4 AM over and over and asked me to go with him because there was an emergency and it was important. Went with him and he took me over to his car and started asking what I thought of it and looked very proud. In other words, this dude rang every apartment in the building at 4 AM to get people to look at his new car. May not be a neighbor per se, but a fellow tenant in a shared house at university. Each was a self-contained apartment with bathroom, kitchen, bedroom. Dude started smoking weed, which I had no issue with, but as I was studying law and frequently met with police as part of my criminal justice module, I requested that he keep it to his room rather than the communal areas of the house. He obliged initially. I then went home for winter break, and upon returning I found lines of coke half done on the kitchen counter, along with even rolled up £10 notes in the semi-empty bag. I stayed clear, and later that night, 2 AM, heard a knock at the door. A guy with blood dripping from his head was standing there shouting, "Rob, get your butt out here. You ripped me off." Turns out his habit had progressed to dealing, and his supplier to whom he owed a cut was the blood-soaked man on my doorstep barging his way in. On a near daily basis, he throws temper tantrums, yelling, stomping, throwing tools, slamming doors and screaming at his family over some petty nonsense. He's a crappy person. I feel bad for his family and I'm genuinely annoyed each time I hear his voice. My husband did this for a long time. Could not deal with frustration and anger. Then he was diagnosed with ADD. Concerta is a lifesaver. He's so sweet and a problem solver now. It's been 17 years without a tantrum. I feel sorry for this guy and his family and you. My butthole of a next door neighbor would leave her pit bulls out in the garden all day, every day, with no food or water, and regardless of the weather. It would be a storm and she'd leave them both outside in the rain, crying. It would be a heat wave and she'd leave them outside with no shade. Once I picked up on it, I began to knock on her door and ask her to bring the dogs in because leaving them outside was obviously neglect. She would tell me to mind my own business, but she'd yell at her kids to bring the dogs inside. Once I noticed that she didn't learn her lesson, I contacted the RSEPA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, over and over until they sent out a letter to her. She had the fricking nerve to act like she had no idea why the RSPCA was contacting her. She came up to me in the street and was like, "Can you believe I got this letter saying I fricking abuse my dogs?" I kept contacting them because despite knowing that the RSPCA were watching her, she still didn't change her behavior. She honestly didn't care about those poor dogs. They would jump at my fence whenever I was in the garden, practically begging. My sisters would jump the fence to give them bowls of water and feed them dog biscuits whenever she wasn't home. One day, she was yelling and her kids were crying, so I went to see what was going on, and it turns out that the RSPCA were removing the dogs from her because of the neglect. Took a few months, but I was so happy to see them going to a better home. Maybe they should have taken the kids with them too. Picked a fight with our 70-year-old Indian neighbor. Like, an actual physical fight. Fuckstick is in his 30s. Indian neighbor has seen way too much bulls in his life to tolerate anymore and hit him with a nectarine tree in a pot. If only more of life's problems could be solved by hitting someone with a nectarine tree in a pot. When I was 10, my neighbor, an 80-something-year-old man with a Christian radio station, shot and killed one of my dogs. When I went looking for my dog, I asked my neighbor if he had seen him. He told me that he shot a dog like that this morning, frozen. I asked where he was so I could bury him. The old man told me that his body was in the dumpster and that he would shoot me too if I didn't get off his land. I ran through the woods back to my house, screaming out loud in anger and punching trees until my knuckles were torn and bloody. When I got home, I called the police and the K9 unit came out to my house. He retrieved my dog's body and I buried him. The worst part was that my dog was very sweet. I know that generally sweet dogs can be threatening, but it was very against his nature. My neighbor had tied him up and broken all of his legs, then shot him point blank in the chest with a shotgun. I have never felt more rage in my life. My mom took the man to court and he was charged with animal cruelty and the judge asked how much money I thought the dog was worth. I was dumbfounded and croaked out that I didn't want money. I wanted my dog. The neighbor was fined $500 and I made him pay it to the local humane society. The man had the 10 commandments posted all around his house. So the next night I took a red Sharpie and circled "Thou shalt not kill" on all of his signs. I doubt anyone will see this comment, but dang. Writing it was kind of therapeutic. My dog's name was Hershey. He was a mutt that was born in my bedroom. He was only 2 years old and such a good boy. Thanks Reddit. It amazes me how many people are out there that are this freaking disgusting. Brutally killing a 10-year-old dog and then nonchalantly saying, "Yeah, I shot a dog this morning. It might have been yours." I feel like $500 wasn't enough. I remember having an older neighbor kid ask the rest of us younger kids to collect snails so he can have a snail pet farm. Me and 3 others collected them and gave them to him in a cardboard box. Then he said, "Watch this." He then showed us a can of hairspray and a lighter and torched the snails to death. I didn't talk to that kid after that. What the frick? Not one of her neighbors can stand her. She's pee off everyone on all sides of her. Her son's a cop so she'll send him over to be at you if you violate any of her peeves. She did that about one of the dogs. She hates animals. And my wife answered the door. Her poor kid got an earful and told to go home before she called his captain to complain about the mama's boy that lives next door harassing people. Hilarious. She regularly gets into it with her neighbor on the other side, which is a mistake, since that woman is taking care of a dementia-suffering husband and puts up with zero crap. I can hear her regularly telling her to get bent. Her college-age other son comes home now and then and they get into shouting matches in the backyard with him calling her B and other things you just don't call your mom. It must be tiring to be such a raging B all the time. Her poor kid got an earful and told to go home before she called his captain to complain about the mama's boy that lives next door harassing people. I hope your wife did that anyway. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.